ahead. So I feel very hopeful because so many people are wanting to get engaged. The week after the election, I touched base with our webmaster, and we have a form on our website that says, do you want to volunteer with the ACLU of Delaware? A week after the election, we had 545 people in the state of Delaware who had filled it out saying that they wanted to volunteer and take action and be part of the movement with the ACLU of Delaware. That fills me with a lot of hope because we've never had 545 people in a single week who've said, I'm ready to get to work and take action. We just concluded three Firewall for Freedom trainings for advocates to learn how to be good advocates when they are talking to their legislators, learning about some of the issues that we're going to be advocating for. We've trained now over 200 people throughout the state at each of those trainings, one in each county. Each one of those trainings has now led to about 4 to 5 new engagements that we're going to be doing. So you're going to be seeing more of these trainings coming up on our website. And we're trying to train people up because we know that we're going to need you to make a difference. One of the reasons that I think I felt very hopeless and why many of you might feel frustrated is we're looking at the three branches of our government. We see a president that we've already gone through one term with, and we know that he is radioactive to civil liberties. We've seen Congress, and I know we have some great Congress members, especially from the first state, but we see what they have prioritized over the first few weeks, and they are attacks on, our friends and neighbors and on our cherished rights and freedoms. And then we also have the Supreme Court that has shown over the last few years that they are more than willing to overturn hard fought rights that we have. And so I understand that many of us feel hopeless, but we are still a democracy. And the real power in this country still resides with we, the people, and that we can make a difference, maybe federally, but definitely here in the state of Delaware. One of the reasons that I am really proud to work for an organization like the ACLU is that we are folks that always plan ahead. Sue mentioned sort of my trajectory in the organization. I did work for the ACLU of Ohio in 2016 and 2017 when Donald Trump was elected to his first term. And we certainly prepared. We, did memos on him. We, looked very seriously at him as a candidate. But, truth be told, we were like a lot of the rest of the country, where if you would have asked most of us, we were probably thinking, Hillary Clinton's probably going to win this, and we're probably going to be dealing with the President Clinton. And then that didn't happen. And so we certainly were, catching up a little bit in those moments because we were just as surprised as I think a lot of the rest of the country was. So we didn't want to be caught unawares this time. So over a year ago, we started planning both internally at the ACLU of Delaware, but also nationally. We had multiple conferences, long Zoom retreats with all of our colleagues across the country talking about this potential outcome and what are we going to do to be prepared if there is a possible Donald Trump as president. And so, we knew this could happen, and we started to talk to people here in the state of Delaware even before the election happened. One of the things that we produced, again, you heard me say the advocacy program that we had was called, Firewall for Freedom. And that's really the branding that we've used for this campaign because we recognize states like Delaware are really special because we have elected officials who have said that they care about various civil liberties issues and that they're potentially willing to stand up for those things here in this state. And so they can actually erect a firewall to help to protect the people here in this state. Um, I am also very much an optimist in that I believe that we can protect people, but we are also a very special state and that we have the opportunity to actually move the ball forward and expand rights in this state too over the next 4 years. I believe that we can do it and we're going to push to do it here. So we created a set of policies that we call the Firewall for Freedom Guide. We provided them to both the governor-elect and the attorney general before the election. We spoke to them about, we met with them, walked them through some of our priorities, and they focused on all of the things that we believed if Donald Trump was going to be elected, what he might do. We also provided those same policies to our legislative leaders and also met with them, spoke with them about the potential threats, and answered any questions that they had. When the election happened and we got the result that we got, we have now been, over the last several months, continuing to work with those officials and helping to guide them through, I think, this very, tenuous, frightening time. We have outlined what we think are some of the most important priorities that our elected officials could take action on right now to help to mitigate some of the harms that are coming out of the Trump administration. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I want to show you all our Firewall for Freedom webpage, because this actually outlines some of the things that we're talking about. And just so you know, if you want to look at this webpage, it's aclu-de.org/firewall. Very easy to remember. But you'll see here a lot of the branding for it. And it includes, some things from our national office, a note from me about some of the things, but this really outlines the major things that we're asking for our state government to do. And, the number one thing that we're really pushing for Governor Meyer and Attorney General Jennings to do is to essentially refuse to cooperate. That if the administration is trying to do these massive anti-civil liberties campaigns, and this could range. I mean, I think a lot of us right now are thinking about immigration crackdowns, right? If there were mass raids or detention in the state of Delaware, that we may say, we're not going to assist you with that. But this is really cross-cutting over a variety of civil liberties issues that we might see where the federal government starts to try and request information on people who have accessed reproductive or gender-affirming care. We might see crackdowns on public protests. We could see requests for students' information. So we want to make sure that all of that is protected, and that while we as a state can't necessarily stop all of the federal government from doing certain things, we can say, we're not going to provide you with this information. We're not going to help you to harm our residents here in the state of Delaware. To sort of go along with that, the second major thing that we're asking for is really for the governor and the attorney general, again, to instruct our state officials not to cooperate with a lot of these really horrible anti-immigrant actions that we're seeing. So I think everyone is on edge right now in the state of Delaware. I'll just be honest, every single day I've gotten, since Donald Trump has been inaugurated, I have gotten a call somewhere in Delaware saying they think a raid may be happening. All of those have proven to be rumors thus far, but I think everyone in the community is very much on edge. The reality is that immigration is a bit of a double-edged sword in terms of the law. So when we had a President Biden, he was able to assert his control over immigration because immigration enforcement is a federal thing. So when the governor of Texas wanted to put a razor wire fence in the Rio Grande River, President Biden was able to say, no, you're not allowed to do that. I am the commander in chief. I'm in charge of immigration policy, and I'm not permitting that. And he took them to court and he won that argument. Now we're dealing with the President Trump. And so President Trump and the federal government have the right to enforce a lot of these immigration orders. So if they have a specific warrant that says Mike Brickner is an undocumented immigrant and he needs to be detained and deported, and he lives at this address in Wilmington, they can come to my address in Wilmington and arrest and detain me and deport me. They have the legal ability to do that. But what they don't have the legal right to do are to necessarily do all of these dragnet immigration raids, utilize things like racial profiling, violate people's due process rights, and that we can provide some parameters from what they are allowed to do. So if the federal government comes and they want to do a raid in Sussex County, they're going to ask for help from like the Delaware State Police or the Sussex County Sheriff. And so our governor and our attorney general can instruct those agencies and say, we don't want you to assist them. Similarly, we have the matricular here in the state of Delaware, which is what undocumented people can get in order to drive legally from the DMV. The governor can say, I don't want you to share any information about that with the federal government if they ask you. And they can order the DMV, again, not to cooperate. So we can't necessarily stop the Trump administration from enforcing immigration laws. They have the right to do it as long as they're abiding by the Constitution. But we can slow down the machinery of the immigration and mass deportation machine. Similarly, we can also utilize legislation. I just want to mention this really quickly as well. Many of you may have seen that President Biden had an executive order that protected safe spaces. So these are things like courts and schools and hospitals, where they said immigration officials should not go and do these mass raids looking for undocumented people. Those should be safe places in our community. And that's incredibly important because if you think about, let's say you are an undocumented woman and you are in an abusive relationship and you go to law enforcement, they decide to press charges against your partner, and now you have to go to court to testify, but there's an immigration officer posted up outside of court. Are you going to be likely to show up and testify against your abuser if you know there's a real chance that you could be seen by this immigration officer and potentially arrested and detained and deported? Similarly, like if you're a parent of a child and your child is a US citizen, but you're undocumented and you have to go and have parent-teacher conferences with them, but you think that there might be an immigration officer posted up outside of school, are you likely to show up for that parent-teacher conference? Those are the kinds of situations that we're putting our friends and neighbors in the immigrant community into by taking away those safe spaces. So right now, we actually have a legislator who is working and is going to sponsor legislation to address this issue. Again, you can't necessarily prevent Immigration and Customs Enforcement from going to a school if they have a specific warrant to detain somebody who is an undocumented immigrant that they know is there, but you can stop them from doing these dragnet searches and posting up outside of the facilities and instilling that fear in the community. And I think it's really important that to name that's what this is really about. That at the end of 4 years, there could be no mass raid that ever happens in the state of Delaware, but the fact that so many people are afraid of it, it is throwing lives into disarray and forcing people to sort of move underground, under radar, and significantly challenging a lot of people who are just trying to live, raise their family, work in the community, but are filled with this constant fear every day. The other asks that we have on this Firewall website that we're really prioritizing are also guaranteeing equal access to education. And this is an ask for our Attorney General. Again, sending out notification to all of our schools that we have to protect all of our students equally. So I think many of us, when President Trump was first elected, expected that the Department of Education was going to rescind a lot of its guidance for vulnerable communities. And in fact, that's already happened, where we had an executive order protecting LGBTQ students, and the president already rescinded that order. However, Delaware law protects these vulnerable students. We have non-discrimination laws in place for people who are LGBTQ, people who are pregnant, people from different nations, people because of race. And so our attorney general can reaffirm those things, because what we're really concerned about is that there may be school districts or administrators or teachers or even just other students and families who hear about these protections on the federal level being rolled back, and that suddenly they have permission to move forward and start to bully or harass or deny equal education opportunity to students in these groups. So we want to make sure that people know what their rights are and that they're going to be protected. Lastly, we also have ensuring access to reproductive health care. And I'm going to put a asterisk on here because I also want to talk about gender affirming care. We've done a lot over the last few years in the area of reproductive health care, and we generally have, I think, a pretty good system for gender affirming care as well. But we are concerned about what the impact is going to be for finances and then also protections for people seeking reproductive and gender affirming care. A couple years ago, after Roe versus Wade fell, Delaware passed what's known as a shield law for people seeking reproductive health care. This law would stop an out-of-state attorney general from trying to investigate or punish a person who came to Delaware to get reproductive health care. It would also prevent them from investigating or trying to punish the provider who gave that health care. So it says that Delaware is not going to cooperate with various subpoenas, that if they try and criminalize the person, that the person could actually file a lawsuit in the state of Delaware to recoup their attorney's fees. So it really helps to protect the patient and the provider here in Delaware from those other attorneys general. The problem, though, is that the current shield law only protects against other states. It does not protect against federal investigations. And so now that Donald Trump is overseeing the Department of Justice and has all of these other levers within the federal government, we want to reinforce that and make sure that our state also covers federal investigations or attempts to criminalize people. And we also want them to include gender affirming care. I talk to people every day who are coming to Delaware because they're losing access to gender affirming care in other states. And so they're moving to Delaware. And so we need to provide that same protection for folks to receive gender affirming care here in Delaware without fear that they're going to be punished or criminalized from another state or from the federal government. And same for our providers here. We're actively working with legislators to introduce that legislation to fix both of those issues, and I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to do it this year. The other thing, though, in terms of access is really funding. Last year, we passed a law allowing Medicaid funding for abortion care. We already allow Medicaid funding for gender affirming care. But I think the executive orders that have come out this week are a really good example of how potentially tenuous that might be. So one of the executive orders around gender affirming care that came out said that the the federal government is going to restrict Medicare and Medicaid dollars, and that it can't be used for gender affirming care. Now, a lot of states, including Delaware, mandate that. And so there's a question, and we're all still kind of waiting to see how things play out, that Delaware or other states that provide the funding for gender affirming care might then lose federal funding for their Medicare, Medicaid dollars. And that could have a significant impact. And so states are trying to figure out, okay, how do we still provide this and not lose this funding? And similarly, those same attacks may come down on reproductive health care. So we're recommending that the state invest in funds that can help to provide money for providers, abortion funds in the state, patients, and other folks who are trying to seek that care who might suddenly lose access through Medicaid or Medicare. So those are some of the major issues that we're pushing for, and I can talk a little bit more about them, but I also want to show you in terms of what you can do. So here we have one, responses from candidates who ran for office on the state level in 2024. We collect all of those, and many of them address the issues that I talked about as well as others. So this shows you those responses and helps you to give a sense of where those various legislators are and what they're going to do to help protect our rights. This is our volunteer sign up. So as I mentioned, you could be one of the 545 people plus who have signed up with the ACLU of Delaware. We've actually now come up with various volunteer job descriptions. We're sending out like a weekly email with different opportunities. So we're really trying to get people involved. You can also donate, become an ACLU member, and you can also share information. And that's actually what I want to show next. Because as I mentioned, as much as as it's going to be important for us to change policies, we also have to make sure that people know what their rights are, because so much of this is really about instilling fear in people and making people feel like they don't have any rights. And that's not true. A lot of the first couple calls and emails I got after the election, and there was actually like an article about it in Spotlight Delaware, there was a big concern about what are trans students going to do in schools? That now that, the Department of Education is probably going to remove all these protections, Delaware students aren't going to have a whole lot of options. And our response was, well, wait a second, actually, there are a lot of rights. And so we created this Know Your Rights pocket guide for trans and gender diverse youth that outline all of their rights while they're at school and what protections they have. These are available as wallet cards, so you can order them from our office. You can hand out as many as you'd like, and we will provide them all to you for free. But similarly, we have Know Your Rights on your First Amendment rights. So if you're going to go out and protest or demonstrate, we have that. We also just created a Know Your Rights for essentially adult LGBTQ people, because we have protections for employment, housing, and public accommodations in the state too. But again, people feel like, oh no, the federal government's coming after particularly the trans community right now, and they're taking away all these rights, and now we're not going to be protected. But actually, we do have these protections here on the state level. So we want to make sure people know that. In addition, though, we have some of our Know Your Rights stuff available online right now for immigrants, but we're actually producing a few more. The first one we have here is knowing your rights if you're interacting with immigration and customs enforcement and other law enforcement agencies. So this really walks a person through all of the different steps of what if an ICE agent knocks on your door? What if you're driving and you get pulled over? What are you allowed to do? What are you allowed to say? What does a person need to show you in order to get access into your home or your workplace? All of those types of things. That's available in English and Spanish, and we're translating it right now to Haitian Creole as well. So that'll be available, and all of those cards are on order right now as well. We also have Know Your Rights for immigrants, students, and families. So again, for a lot of young people, they are in mixed status families. Maybe the child is not an American citizen, or maybe they are. Maybe the parents are American citizens, maybe they're not, right? And so what we wanted to provide was what your rights are when you're going into school for both the parents and the students, because both groups of people feel, I think, very nervous about, am I going to have to provide my immigration status? What if I need to have a translator? What if my child isn't a fluent English speaker? All of those types of things. And so we really walk through all of the rights that you have to a public education. Part of this too is helping to tamp down on the rhetoric. When I talk to a lot of parents of immigrant kids, of Black and brown kids, of trans kids, most of them are, of course, afraid that their child's going to be discriminated against, but many of them are actually most afraid of the rhetoric that they're hearing out there. And that essentially, when we pass some of these awful executive orders, we're essentially sending the message that it's okay to discriminate against these groups of folks. In addition to those Know Your Rights documents, we are also producing a Know Your Rights for service providers. So this is something that we're hearing quite a bit are from educators, people who work at hospitals, teachers, nonprofits who all work with folks in the immigrant community who are saying, well, what happens if I get contacted by ICE? What happens if ICE shows up at my door? What am I supposed to do? What am I allowed to do to potentially slow down this stuff too? And so we're really working with several groups across the state, with the Delaware Alliance for Nonprofit Advancement, with several churches. We're putting together a Know Your Rights brochure, and we're going to be having public trainings on this as well, for those folks. Lastly, we are also working on rights for immigrants in terms of non-discrimination in employment, housing, and public accommodations as well. As I said, Delaware does have non-discrimination laws that say you can't be discriminated against because of your national origin. And so there are protections in place for people in those situations. And so we're producing a Know Your Rights card on that. All of this stuff is going to be available. And if you sign up for our email list, you're going to get an email about it. We'll have an order form up. You can order as much as you want, and we'll send it to you. You can come pick it up at our office. But again, educating people on these issues we think is really, really important right now. Again, the fear is really palpable in a lot of these communities. And so making sure that people are empowered and know what their rights are is incredibly important. But we also know we need to make changes. And as I said, I get a little depressed sometimes seeing what's happening on the federal level. We have all the executive orders. We have, not so great bills being passed. We just had the Laken Riley Act that passed out of Congress. About a week ago, we had an anti-trans bill pass out of the House that would take away funding for schools that allow trans girls to participate in girls' sports. We're very likely, I think, next, as early as another week from now, to see a bill that would punish states or cities that allow sanctuary for immigrants to be punished as well. So that's the type of stuff that we're seeing out of the federal government. But I can tell you, talking to our attorney general, our governor, our state legislative leaders, all of them are highly concerned about these issues. And what we really need right now is going to be a lot of people power, because if you've been to a recent talk from our governor, he has said publicly, and this always gets like the highest applause line, which is great, that he is going to protect people from President Trump if he tries to attack Delawareans' rights. And that's great. Like, it is wonderful to have a governor who is explicitly saying that. But also, as I said earlier, I'm getting calls every day of people afraid that a raid is happening in their town. The question is being called that Yes, it's great to say that publicly, and now we need the action next. And I understand it's a scary thing. Like I just said, there's a bill that's going to go through Congress that they'll try and pass to punish sanctuary cities. If folks saw, there was a memo from the Department of Justice that leaked yesterday that said that they were going to prosecute any state and local officials that didn't cooperate with them on immigration enforcement. ACLU actually just issued an open letter to them saying that would be unconstitutional and we'd come after them if they did that. Um, but again, it's a scary time that a lot of our officials, may feel like, okay, I'm going to be opening myself up to, me potentially being punished. I might open up our state or our city to losing funding. And so, what we really have to do, I think, as a community of neighbors here in Delaware, is we have to tell our elected officials, we need you to have our backs and our families' backs and our neighbors' backs and our coworkers' backs and our church congregants' backs. We want you to make sure you're protecting all of these communities that are under threat right now. And if you have their backs, we're going to have your back as well. Because again, standing up to President Trump may come with some consequences, right? They may try and take federal funding. They may try and punish our state or our officials in some way, but we also have to do what's right. We have to protect people from having their rights violated. So, if you sign up for our volunteer list, you will have opportunities to do some of that direct work. We are organizing right now postcard parties, abilities to call and email into your legislator, ability to come down for lobby days to Dover, to work directly with your legislator or the governor and attorney general if we're advocating for them to help us make the case and to push for these reforms and to push for these protections. So, we believe very fervently that Delaware is, and our elected officials are going to do the right thing. I know a lot of these people. I talk to them. I know where their hearts are, but they also need to hear from us and to hear, the thank yous from us to say, thank you for having these folks' backs. Thank you for taking these steps to protect our friends and neighbors. That is really what is needed right now. I would just say I'd be remiss not to mention the other actions that the ACLU has taken nationally and kind of what we're also still examining. So we have already taken several legal actions. We were one of the groups that filed against the executive order that attacked the 14th Amendment and birthright citizenship. I think this is a very scary proposition. I was glad to see, I think many of you also saw that in one of the cases in Seattle, a judge ruled today and said, no, this can't go forward. This is blatantly unconstitutional. And we were very happy to see that. I would also say that I'm starting to become more and more comfortable with the idea that unfortunately things that we may have previously felt were unimaginable may soon become reality. If you would have asked me 30 years ago if birthright citizenship was going to go away, I would say never in a million years. Do I think it's likely? Maybe not. But I think that we have to really guard against it and work hard in the courts and the court of public opinion to show why this would be so, so deadly and so, so dangerous. Because that is the goal of many people in the president's orbit, is to turn us back to a pre-1865 society, right? That this is really, I think, about restoring an old order that revolves around white supremacy. And so again, that is where birthright citizenship goes into that issue. In addition, we also filed a lawsuit or a motion in an already existing lawsuit around CBP1. So the day that President Trump was inaugurated, you might have seen, even before he signed all of the executive orders, there were news stories and pictures coming out from the border of thousands of people who had had appointments that day to make their cases for asylum. All of those were canceled on that day, and all of the future asylum appointments were canceled. There were 30,000 appointments. Most of these people who were in Mexico had traveled from El Salvador or Venezuela or Colombia. So, hundreds or thousands of miles, and were basically marooned at the Mexican border, unable to make their case for asylum. So we had an already existing lawsuit. We amended that and included that the CBP1 cancellation in that lawsuit, and asked for the judge to take it up on an expedited basis. So we're waiting for that as well. We also then saw where President Trump essentially has put all asylum cases on hold. So there were folks from Afghanistan and other countries that were supposed to fly into the country. We sued over that in Trump 1.0. We have already now sued over that yet again. So that is the third immigration lawsuit that we filed, and it's only Thursday, and he was only inaugurated on Monday. In addition, we are very seriously looking at some of the other executive orders, particularly the ones on trans individuals, and defining that there's only male and female, and it's what you were biologically at conception, and all of that ridiculousness. In addition, we are looking very closely at the diversity, equity, and inclusion executive orders that have come out. We believe that there's some very serious First Amendment issues with that. And so, we're going to continue to file lawsuits and challenge the administration we can. I would love to tell you that, the awfulness is over. But what I can tell you is we had actually been expecting on Monday, we had heard from folks in the administration that there were supposed to be over 100 executive orders signed that day, and there were only 40. And so we know there are dozens and dozens and dozens of more out there that he is probably going to continue to put out as we go along. And I want to leave you with, that is also part of the point, right? The fear is the point, but also the confusion and the distraction is part of the point. And that if they can throw out things to keep us constantly moving around and not able to focus on one thing, that is going to wear us out very quickly. And so I want to just leave with you that, as a national organization, we have a strong nationwide ACLU. We have affiliates in 54 states. We talk to each other, we coordinate with one another, and there are issues where, we say we're going to be the lead, national's going to be the lead, this other person in another state and another affiliate's going to be the lead. So we're coordinating with each other, and we're also moving together. And so on some of the advocacy that we're doing, we're talking to our friends in Maryland and New Jersey and Pennsylvania to make sure that we are responding to these issues in a regional way, so that we can maximize the wins that we can possibly get out of all of this. So, we're staying focused. We know that we can erect these protections in the state of Delaware, and we also know that we can move the ball forward and actually improve rights in the state, and we can be a beacon for hope for the rest of the country. But it starts with conversations like this, that we can't do it on our own as an organization. I have 16 staff members, which I'd love to say, that's a lot more than what we used to have, but it's nowhere near enough to do all the work that we have to do. And so we're going to need volunteers and advocates like you to help us push for these reforms. So please go on, volunteer, become an ACLU member if you're not already, and join us, get some literature, start to interact with our advocacy work. And I know that we can, again, erect that firewall for freedom here in Delaware. So that's the end of my comments, but I'm happy to take any of your questions about honestly anything. Being the executive director, I have to be a jack of all trades and know a little bit about everything, at least enough to be dangerous. So I'll take any question you might have.
So if you have a question or a comment, please raise your hand. Either use the little raise hand button or the old-fashioned way will work, whichever. I think Sally's going to raise her hand.
She did. Yeah, Mike, thank you so much. So appreciative of the work that the ACLU is doing. I'm just wondering, when push comes to shove, and Delaware's got a law, and the federal people are knocking on the door. How's that power resolve?
Yeah, thank you for that, because that's honestly one of the biggest questions I get, because a lot of people, who have looked at the Constitution say, well, isn't there the supremacy clause that, the federal government's up above the state government and then there's local governments, and that is true. However, it kind of depends on the issue and it depends on what way you're looking at it as well. Education is a great example, right? So there's the Department of Education that does have some like federal oversight, but honestly, a lot of the power around education is left up to the individual states. So we have a lot of leeway in terms of saying in the state of Delaware, here's what we want to do or don't want to do in the realm of education. In immigration, the federal government has a lot of leeway to enforce the laws. But as I said earlier, there's also a lot of past case law. There's other laws on the books that have upheld the right for state and local governments to say, we're not going to participate in this, right? Like you might be the one to enforce the laws, go ahead, but we're not going to help you, right? And so yes, federal law does take some precedence, or executive orders may take some precedence, but there are a lot of things that we can pass that can provide that protection, and ensure that the laws are not implemented in the worst possible way, or can help to again mitigate some of the harm that those federal executive orders or laws may actually visit upon us.
But I'm still wondering when the federal government comes to any of the things that would be challenged and says we need this, for example, we need this information to be able to um, do our job. Then how do we say no? How do we stand up to that?
So, again, it depends on what information they're asking for. But in general, if it's information that, we're not required to hand over to the federal government, we can say we need to respect the privacy of our individuals and we're not required to hand this over. And so we don't have to. And there have been, lots of cases over the years where they have said, states or local governments don't have to hand that information over to the federal government, that right to privacy, for the individual who gave up their information to the state is more important. The federal government would have to present a case that would show like they, go far and above a need to get that information.
Thank you.
Roger?
Roger?
Yeah, thanks. Great talk. Exposition for 40 minutes without pause. That's terrific. You mentioned a couple times funding. And oh, well, if we do that, they could cut this funding or cut that funding. Now, who is they in that instance? Does that Congress cutting the funding? Or can Trump or the president, let's say, just say, don't pay this state and this state and this state because unlike things that they're doing. It seems like that is overly broad executive power. Um,
Yes.
that's mammoth, you know.
Yeah, and I think that actually gets to some of the arguments that we're making with some of the folks who are a little scared about the loss of funding right now, because President Trump, in his first term, also threatened to cut funding for various states or cities or counties. And it's a lot harder to do, as you're kind of suggesting, right? Because there are some things that money has already been appropriated, that the only way to take that money away is through a congressional act, right? Like the president can't just unilaterally do it. Now, there are some pots of funding that the president may have control over, right? Or that he might be able to direct his various departments to have control over and to cut funding in certain ways. But God bless Washington, D.C., because it is very bureaucratic. And even those things take a while to do, which we saw during Trump 1.0. And when he also went after some of that funding in Trump 1.0, all sorts of cities, states, and counties filed lawsuits against it. So at the end of the day, after that 4-year period where he threatened all of these cuts for funding, there were very few, if any, losses in funding for people that stood up for sanctuary because it took a long time. He didn't have the authority to do it, or it got tied up in litigation for several years. And so those are some of the things we're trying to encourage our local officials is that, it's not going to be so easy for them just to unilaterally, cut funding and to do it quickly and without challenge.
I guess what goes around comes around, because what he has done, the president has done, is delay, litigate, and seemed like it's endless. And I guess the ACLU has some experience in doing that.
Well, and I will say that to kind of give folks hope. Now, I have to say, so every 2 years we have a biennial leadership conference, and I get a question about the courts quite a bit of like, oh, do you just not want to bring any cases to federal court anymore? Our national legal director presented this last biennial conference, and the ACLU appears in front of the Supreme Court more than any other group in the country. Our win percentage, our ratio is pretty much the same as it has been for the last several decades. So we are still winning cases. I think a lot of what we're seeing is somewhat of a quantity over quality. Like we're winning a lot of Fourth Amendment cases and First Amendment cases, and then we're taking some big losses, like on Roe versus Wade or the loss of affirmative action. But the Supreme Court is still, ruling on many cases in the right way. It's just on different cases that don't always get the proper due. And so, we still know that we can utilize the courts, and that, every time I file a lawsuit or I ask my staff to file a lawsuit, I believe that we can win, but I also recognize that there are other ways to win, even if it is just gumming up the works and tying something up for several years. And hopefully we win that case. But even if we don't, just tying up that horrible law for a few years is also a win in and of itself.
Thank you.
Mike, you mentioned that there have been, I guess, 3 advocacy training sessions so far, and I gather that you'll have more.
Yeah.
Can you just tell us a little bit about what the end result is of going through advocacy training, and what does that piece of work look like? If someone were interested, what are they potentially signing up for?
Yeah, so the advocacy trainings, and we are going to have more posted on our website soon, because as I said, every single one that we've had, it's like a little weed, 3 more pop up and we get to do more. So it's really wonderful how organic it's been. But they're about an hour and a half long, and the first part is it may be a little rudimentary for some of you, depending on how much you've worked, but we essentially do do you remember the Schoolhouse Rock cartoons where you learn
How a
how
bill becomes a law?
right? So
Yeah.
we do a little bit of that, of like, how does it work in Delaware? Because some people that come to these have never worked with the legislature, understand politics at all, right? So we just talk, here's the basics, and that takes maybe 15 minutes or so. And then we move into how to do real advocacy. At the ACLU, we have a team-based approach where when we go with a legislator, we actually bring a team of individuals, and each person on the team has a different role. So we go through those roles, why each role is important. And then at the training, we break people out by issue area. So we ask you before you come or when you arrive, what are you most passionate about? And somebody will say immigrants' rights or trans justice or reproductive rights. And so we have them go into that group. We give them the talking points for these Firewall for Freedom protections that we're asking for. and we have them practice in the small group the various roles, right? So if you're talking about policy, if you're being a storyteller, how can you talk about this bill and get comfortable talking about it? Because a lot of folks, when they go and meet with the legislator, they're like, oh, they're so scary. I'm so nervous and intimidated. How do I speak about this? We really train them. Here are the talking points. And here's how to do it in 2 minutes. That's the challenge. We time them at 2 minutes because after 2 minutes, many legislators, they're thinking about their next meeting. They're off in la la land, off to think about something else. And so we want to make sure that folks are able to deliver it in a very short period of time. And we also train you on how to specifically make the ask for them to get their position confirmed, and how to kind of bird dog them to get a commitment. So it's really hands-on training and really specific so that you feel confident going into those legislator meetings. And then once you're trained in that, as we're planning, trips to Dover, in-house constituent meetings, all of that, we'll want to utilize you to go to those meetings and help us advocate for these changes.
Thank you.
Mike, my name is Bill Nace. I went to
Bill.
your training session a couple Sundays ago, and it was a very efficient and a very well-run hour and a half. So John Reynolds and the rest of your staff did a very, very excellent job. So I appreciate that. I have one, perhaps two legal question, if you will. I have a friend who has a criminal record. He has a drunk driving charge that he's in the probation period now. So he has a criminal record, and he feels somewhat safe, if you will, because drunk driving is a misdemeanor. Someplace along the line, I've seen where, as far as immigration, as far as the immigration system is concerned, misdemeanors get bumped up to the next level, whatever that's called. And is it true that the immigration people can bump levels of crime from misdemeanor to felonies with just by doing it, just by and come to pick my friend up where he feels.
So let me address that, Bill. So the immigration folks can't, ratchet up or change a criminal conviction, but your friend and frankly a lot of other folks, should be concerned. So number one, I know I mentioned like the Laken-Riley Act earlier, and that was just passed. It'll be signed by the president soon, I'm sure. That's going to allow for people not just convicted, but only arrested for minor crimes like shoplifting and theft. These are not, felonies. That they will be automatically detained and put in the system for deportation. So that's a new law that's coming. But even for your friend that has the past conviction for drunk driving, so there is a law in the immigration system that essentially says if you've been convicted of a crime and the maximum sentence is at least 365 days, 1 year, that you must be automatically deported, and that there is no ability for the judge to reconsider that in the immigration case. We've also advocated as part of our Firewall for Freedom stuff for Delaware and other states to changed their laws to 364-day maximums, because then if it's only 364 days and not 365 for that crime, then the judge does have some discretion and can decide, okay, this person, yeah, they had a drunk driving offense, but it was 10 years ago and they've gone to rehab and they're sober, and all of those other things that they could consider to be mitigating. But we're really recommending too that folks that are concerned about a past criminal conviction, that they may consider going to the pardons board to try and get their record cleared, because that could also prevent them from ending up in the immigration system.
And Delaware
Okay.
has some new legislation dealing with expungement that helps to get records cleared without
Cool.
having to go through enormous hoops to make that happen.
Correct.
Okay.
Bill, I know
Yeah.
you said you had another one, but we're running a little late on time, and Dave McBride has his hand up. Let me go to Dave, and then we'll come back to you if there's an opportunity. That okay? Dave.
Okay, my quick on the Laken Riley Act is, I know it's applicable to, I guess, undocumented immigrants. Do you know, is a person who has applied for asylum and has not yet had a hearing and is now in the country waiting for a hearing, is that person an undocumented immigrant subject to deportation under that law? Do you know?
So I believe that it's only for undocumented immigrants, that if you have a pending asylum claim, you are in a different category. So
Okay.
I believe it's only undocumented folks at this point. Although, of course, we have so many concerns over the asylum program being, paused now,
Got
and
it.
then people with current claims potentially having those evaporated too. So.
Yeah, I saw that Trump is proposing to reinstate the rule that if you are in Mexico, you can't get asylum because you're
That's right.
in a place where you don't need asylum because you're in Mexico. The other question, but a dreamer would be subject to deportation under that law, right?
Potentially, because dreamers are in a special class all to themselves. They're undocumented now because they were given deferred action. That might be they might have a good legal challenge around that, but because they're undocumented, they're not really like legal permanent residents in the same way that another legal permanent resident would be. They could be. And I think, a big concern that a lot of us have is that when you're executing a mass, wide-scale immigration raid, detention, and deportation system, that mistakes might get made. And especially when you think about kind of the relative dearth of immigration attorneys out there. Like we actually list on our website for Know Your Rights. Here are the vetted immigration attorneys in the state of Delaware. Like we've worked with several trusted groups to come up with that list, and really there are about 8 in the whole state of Delaware.
Yeah.
So, if there was a mass raid, there could be a lot of folks who aren't going to have access and quick access to an attorney. And so unfortunately, like we're afraid mistakes can be made, or people aren't going to get adequate representation when they have a case that might be in a gray area like what you're describing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bill, let me go back because you said you had 2. You have a second question?
I'm sorry,
Bill
Susan.
Nace? Yeah.
No, I
do you-
don't. I'm finished. I'm fine.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you had 2.
I
Okay.
I saw Beverly's hand earlier.
Okay, Bev. You're muted.
I had a question about we've been talking about, sorry. Am I unmuted?
You are.
Okay.
You're fine.
We've been learning about the different places that ICE will use for jails, and our local police department has a jail, and they're in chain of command or chain of, detainment options for ICE. Is that something that ACL is overseeing and looking into? And is there training that involves, um, working to advocate that our police department does not cooperate or, anything
Yeah.
like that?
Yeah. And Beverly, are you in Delaware or are you in another
I'm in
state?
Pennsylvania.
Got it. Okay. Great to know. Okay, so couple things. I think what you're describing, Beverly, is a what's called a 287G agreement, which essentially a local jurisdiction or state can apply and say, we want to have this agreement with the federal government to help to enforce immigration laws, and we'll house people in our local jail and all that kind of stuff, right? Delaware nor none of the counties as of yet have applied for that, but other places like in Pennsylvania have. That's why I asked that question. So there are toolkits on ACLU National website and ways to get involved. And also, I think if you go to the ACLU of Pennsylvania on how to help fight those 287G agreements. What I would say for Delaware, the most important thing goes back to the non-cooperation is that if Governor Meyer or Attorney General Jennings said that we don't want to cooperate with federal immigration enforcement officials, we can say we don't want to house any immigrants who might be rounded up in our facilities. Typically, if they are housed in Delaware, it's for a very short period of time. Almost everyone who is detained for immigration issues in Delaware ends up in Pennsylvania. There's a chance they could go to New Jersey now too, because Jersey just recently expanded one of its detention centers to add more beds, but most folks go to Pennsylvania. But they do oftentimes spend a few days in some of the prisons here in the state as they're waiting to be transferred. We have the ability to say, actually, we're not going to do that. We don't want to participate. And so that's part of the advocacy that we're doing with the statewide elected officials.
Mike, I want to thank you for being here this evening. Quite sure the ACLU employees and volunteers are going to have no shortage of work coming along. I think that what you describe are actions that we can appropriately take that offer hope that people's rights can be protected. There'll be no shortage of challenges, I'm sure, and obviously you have a wide range of tools in the toolkit. I think it's important for us to be educated and knowledgeable about the issues, to pay attention to the news as much as we can bear. I was in a meeting earlier where someone said they wanted the meeting to end at 6 so they could watch the news. And I said, well, I don't watch the news anymore, so I have an extra free hour every day. But we do keep up, and it's important. And I would say that anyone who is interested in pursuing the advocacy training that Bill has taken, that you've described, signing up to be on your email list or signing up for volunteer opportunities would be a great next step to take. And want to thank you for your efforts. Obviously, you have been doing this for quite a while. And we're grateful that you're here working on behalf of the ACLU and all of us, protecting all of our rights here in Delaware. So, and thank you to all of you who were here this evening. The program is recorded. What we're finding on these recordings is generally anywhere from 25 to 80 people watch each of these programs. So we know that more people than are here this evening will learn this information as well. But I'm particularly grateful to all of you for making time on your Thursday evenings to join us. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Sue.
everyone.
Thank you, Sue.
Thank you so
Matt.
much.
Mike, thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Mike.
you.